Well, I know it doesn't look like it outside, but it's almost Easter. We're beginning our series going into Easter this morning. It's something I'm really excited about. Easter's kind of like the Super Bowl for preachers. And so I'm really excited for moving into that. And we have some people who don't come normally who come on Easter. And I think it's kind of an important time. But as we move into that time, we're going to be building into that. And so if you want to get the full effect of what we're going to be doing, I want you to make sure that you're going to be here for each one of these, because each of these are going to build on each other as we approach that time where we especially celebrate the resurrection of our Lord. I've got a story for you this morning, and it's an old preacher story, so I know it's true. There's this guy, there was a flood, and he climbs up on top of his house because the waters just keep rising and rising and rising. He prays to God, God, rescue me. God, save me. And just about that time, there comes this guy in a rowboat comes by and says, "Hey, get in. We'll take care of you." He says, "No. God's going to save me." So the rowboat leaves. A little bit longer, a little motorboat comes by and says, "Come on, it's time to go. The water's getting higher. You're going to get overtaken." He says, "No. I prayed to God. God's going to save me." A little bit longer, a helicopter comes by. The water's almost to the top. And he says, "You need to get on this helicopter now." And he says, No, God's going to save me. So the helicopter leaves, and the guy dies. The water takes him over, and he goes up to heaven, and he says to God, "God, I thought you were going to rescue me. I thought you were going to save me." He says, "I sent 2 boats and a helicopter. What more did you want?" You know, we like rescue stories. We do. So many of our movies, so many of our comic books, so many of our stories that we tell are rescue stories. We like them. We like the damsel in distress, right? We like the Sleeping Beauty story. A whole bunch of our Disney movies are centered around this rescue idea. And if Disney movies aren't your speed, we've got all sorts of other movies. Saving Private Ryan, anybody? Yeah, great movie. We love rescue stories. There's something about when just in the nick of time, when all the odds are stacked against, the hero still manages to save the day. We love a good rescue story. And I think that's on purpose. I think there's something in us that's built to like that story, that's built to be attracted to that story, because the truth is, the greatest rescue of all time is what we'll celebrate in a few Sundays. But this morning, I want to look at a preview of that, a preview of this rescue where God does something spectacular. Turn with me, if you will, to John chapter 11. John chapter 11. Here in John 11, we're going to look at Jesus and his 3 friends, Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. And we know they're his friends because they eat with him sometimes, they have him over sometimes, and the text will even say that he loves them. And so we're going to just dig in verse 1. It says, "Now a certain man was ill, named Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and Martha, her sister. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, 'Lord, he whom you love is ill.' But when Jesus heard it, he said, 'This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it.'" And so Mary and Martha, they've got the right idea, right? They know that their brother, he is sick. He's in trouble. He's got so much going against him, and they're not sure how he's going to make it. And so what they do is they go to Jesus. Smart, right? That's the right idea. They've got something that's too big for them to deal with. They've got something that they can't quite get around, and so they send to Jesus. the one whom you love is sick. I think that says a couple things to us. One of the things it says is, if you ever hear those preachers who say that, if you are faithful enough, and if you love God enough, if you have a close enough relationship with Jesus, then you're going to be fine. You're not going to get sick, and everything's going to be okay. No. Lazarus, notice, they don't even tell him his name. Their relationship is so close that they just have to say, the one you love is sick. Sometimes the people that Jesus loved get sick. And so Jesus says, this will not end in death, but it is for the glory of God. I'm sure that he sent the messenger away, and the messenger was satisfied with that. Maybe the messenger thought that means Lazarus is going to be okay. The sickness isn't going to take him. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. And so when he heard what Lazarus was ill, he immediately left and went to the side of his friend. No. I mean, think about this. It says he loves these people. These people are important to him. And he stayed there for 2 more days in the place that he was. Jesus, what are you doing? Don't you realize that he's sick? Don't you realize that he needs you? But he stays. And you might think, why? I'm sure that will cross their minds as our story continues. But one of the things that I think sometimes we're in the middle of our crisis, and I love this. Think about this for a moment. So let's say you're sitting there and you've reached the end of your rope. You don't know how you're going to get along, and you say, God, I need you to deliver me from this. I need you to pull me out of this. I need you to be faithful in this. And God says, yes, I'll be there in a couple days. In that moment, you start to, there's a couple questions, and I think the answer to all of them is that sometimes God is glorified in the waiting. Sometimes, in the midst of the pain, because the night is so dark, the light has the opportunity to shine. And so after he stayed in that place for 2 days, it says, then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going to go there again? Jesus answered, are not there 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. After saying these things to them, he said, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. And so Jesus says, we're going to go back to Judea. Bethany is just outside of Jerusalem, east of the Mount of Olives. And so it's right there in Judea. And what's happened is the last time he was there, they tried to kill him. And the disciples kind of get this. They said, all right, we're going to go back. And they say, well, we're going to go back? And we have this kind of parallel with Lazarus' struggle, right? They come to Jesus and say, Jesus, Lazarus is in trouble. And what Jesus says is, all right, we're going to go get into more trouble. Because trouble is not a problem for our God. There is no trouble too big. There is no struggle too intense that our God can't deal with it. And so they say, oh, we can't go back to Judea. They're gonna kill us. Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. And they misunderstand, kind of like we do sometimes. We misunderstand Jesus. We misunderstand what he wants from us. We misunderstand sometimes the call that he's given us. We get off on the wrong track. They think that Jesus is saying that Lazarus has actually fallen asleep. Look at this. It says, the disciples said to him, Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought he meant taking rest in sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died, and for your sake I'm glad that I was not there so that you may believe. But let us go to him. And so they think, oh, if he's napping, he's going to get better. That's right. That's what happens. You rest, you get better. And say, no, Lazarus has died. And did you catch that? He says, for your sake, I am glad that I was not there. That's not the reaction that I would expect from Jesus. That's not the reaction that I would expect from someone who knows that their friend has just passed. But the thing about Jesus, the thing about our God, is that when things, there is so much power, so much resurrection power, so much life, so much truth, so much beauty, that no matter what the force, whatever force of darkness, even death, as we're going to see, it is not enough to stop him. I love Thomas. Thomas is one of Jesus' disciples, and he, I love him because he reminds me of some people I know, actually. My brother he reminds me of my brother a whole lot. Listen to this. So he says, we're going to go, and I'm glad that I wasn't there so that you might believe. And so Thomas, called Didymus, or the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us go that we might also die with him. I love the positive attitude that Thomas takes into this, right? He says, all right, if he's going to die, we might as well go. If he's going to do this, we're just going to go and die. But there's also faith in that, isn't there? That he's willing to step out despite the circumstances, despite the challenges. He's willing to step out and follow Jesus where he's going, even if it means his death. I think Thomas gets kind of a bad rap, doesn't he? We call him Doubting Thomas, right? Because that's what he's famous for. We use that to show people who don't have faith. But here he has his own little cynical flavor of faith, and I like Thomas. He says, if he's going to go, let's go and die with him. Now, when Jesus came, he had found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. So that means that he was dead. That he had been dead so long that decomposition had started. That the major stuff that happens to the body happens in the first 72-ish hours, and so he started to decompose. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. And so I like Martha too. I like Thomas. I like Martha too. We know a little bit about Mary and Martha. We know that they were friends of Jesus. There's a whole story recorded in Luke chapter 10 where Mary and Martha were learning from Jesus, and Mary kind of sits and listens to Jesus intently. And Martha's listening, but she's off doing the cooking. She's off doing she's serving. She's trying to get things ready, and she gets a little resentful about that. But Martha has a good heart, a servant heart, and she comes out to meet Jesus. She hears he's coming. She comes out to meet him. Mary has stayed home. Martha said to Jesus, And I want you to hear these words, because there's pain here, there's anger here. Listen, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Like I said, I like Martha because she's honest. You know, sometimes when we come to God, we have to have these moments of vulnerability. We have to say, God, things have not turned out like I thought they would. I know who you are. I know who you're supposed to be. I know the things that you care about. And right now, it doesn't seem like they're lining up. And that's exactly what Martha does here. She says, Lord, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. And again, in the midst of this anger, in the midst of this hurt, in the midst of this pain, there is faithfulness. Because she says, I know that you could have done something. I know your character. I know who you are. And if you were here, it would have been okay. But even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. You know, sometimes I think we think we serve an if-then God. And what I mean by that is, if the dominoes line up and I get this promotion, then I will increase my donation, my offering. If I can beat this addiction, then I'll be able to serve God. If I can get my marriage in a better place, then I'll be a better father. If then. But what I love about the God that we serve, because that's exactly what Martha says. If you would have been here, then he wouldn't have died. But who we serve is an even now God. That even in the midst of the brokenness and the darkness, not when everything's neat, not when everything's pretty, not when everything's fixed, but even in the midst of death, even now, God is acting. He's moving. He's calling us into greater faithfulness. Not when things are better, but even now. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha said to him, I know that he'll rise in the resurrection on the last day. And so Jesus says, he plainly exactly tells her what he's going to do. Your brother is going to live. Your brother will rise again. She says, okay, Jesus, I get it. You know, at the last day, when the trumpet sounds and he's going to be raised, and that's, I understand that. But the thing is, she thinks she understands resurrection. She thinks she understands God's transforming power. She thinks she understands the gospel of Christ. She thinks she understands what it means to bring life from death, but she's missed it, and Jesus tells her that. Look at this. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. You know, as a preacher, I do funerals. That's part of what I do, and funerals are an interesting time. It's one of my favorite things to do, to walk through the stages of life with the congregation, even up into the end. And one of the things I like to say is when someone passes on is that they're not gone, they just moved. Because this is exactly what Jesus says. He says, those who believe in the Lord, they shall not die. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, as Paul will say. They're not gone, they just moved. And I got to tell you something. If I die and I get to be absent from the body and present with the Lord, don't you dare pray me back. I mean, think about this. He's been in heaven for what, 4 days? I don't know. I mean, this is something that I see here. That Jesus is giving her good news and good news and good news. And what she misses, though, is she thinks about resurrection as this far-off thing that they're eventually going to see. But what she misses is the resurrection present right in front of her. You see, Jesus redefines resurrection from an event to a person. And what he means by that is, Jesus is the source of life. He says, I am the resurrection and I am the life. Jesus is that source of life. You know, we look for life in all sorts of things. We look for meaning and purpose in money. We look for it in we look for it in all sorts of different places. Materialism, we look for it sometimes through satisfying our appetites, whether it be our stomachs or our lust. We look for it in all sorts of different places. But what Jesus does is he shows up and he says, I am the life that you're looking for. When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher is here and he's calling for you. And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but he was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in her house consoling her saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now, this is something to understand. In the ancient world, if you wanted to show that somebody was loved, that somebody was important, you would hire like professional mourners, that the louder you could wail, the more loved that person was. And so these Jews who are with her, they think, oh, it's our time to weep, right? This is what we're here for. We want to weep loudly so that that the people will know that Lazarus was cared for, that Lazarus was loved. But that's not where she's going. She's not going to the tomb. It says, now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying, Lord, if you had been here, then my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And so they come up and Mary says the same thing that Martha said. He says, if you had been here, then my brother wouldn't have died. And the people weep. And the Greek here is interesting. He says, greatly troubled in spirit, right? He says he was moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And this is only used in a couple other places in the Greek language. And to try and understand what this phrase means, it's an idiom is what it is. It's a saying. And what it means is he's pretty annoyed, actually. Jesus is annoyed, greatly disturbed in spirit and troubled. And why might he be annoyed? Well, the thing is, Jesus has just said, Lazarus is going to be raised. I am the resurrection and the life. What you're looking for, I'm it. And they all weep. And he says, where have you laid them? They said to him, Lord, come and see. And then we have the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. So the Jews say, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind also have kept this man from dying? And so Jesus, he's telling them over and over again, I am what you're looking for. I am the source of life. I am the resurrection. And they don't get it. They don't get it. They don't get it. And he says, show me where you've laid him. And then he weeps. I've always wondered why. Because he knows that he's about to raise Lazarus from the dead. Perhaps he did it to show compassion. Maybe he wanted to show compassion. I think the real reason is that even though that we follow a God who can redeem our suffering, we follow a God who's bigger than any illness, we follow a God who is bigger than any problems that we can face, it doesn't mean that when we hurt, he doesn't hurt. The scriptures say this clearly, that God is close to the brokenhearted. And I think here, even in the midst of the hope that Jesus is going to bring to these people, he sees their despair and he joins them in it. And some of them see that love. Some of them say, this is how he loved him. But then some of them also say, couldn't the guy who restores the sight to the blind kept this guy alive? And so some respond with faithfulness and some respond with doubt. Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. And Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead for 4 days. I love the King James here. He stinketh. The way that it would work in tombs is you would have a small room with space for enough, with shelves kind of carved out of the stone, for space for about 5 to 8 bodies, depending on how big your tomb was of your family. And what you do is you'd leave it on there, leave the body on there, and let the decomposition do its work over about a year. And then once you were done with that, you'd take the body, take the bones, because there would be nothing left but the bones, and put them in what are called ossuaries, little boxes of bones, and you'd kind of store those in there. So the bodies were only there for a year-ish, and then they were stored in ossuaries. And so they've got this laid out, they've got Lazarus laid out here, and the smell, I don't know how many of you have smelled like, okay, I'll share a short story with you real quick. When I was working in Hennessy, my office was in the back of the building, and so I came in one day. I had been gone for a summer camp, and I smelled this smell. I was like, oh no, that is the smell of death. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Like that is a very particular smell, and I'm not going to lie to you. It took me 3 days to find what it was. There was a rat that had been decomposing. And so when it says he stinketh, there is an odor, that's dead. That's real dead. In the ancient world, they believed that up to 3 days, the spirit might return to the body. That before this decomposition stuff sets in, they might wake up. But at this point, there is no hope. And the sisters make it clear, Lord, he's been dead 4 days. He stinks. There's nothing you can do. But Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you've heard me. I know that you always hear me. But I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. When he said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The man who had died came out with his hands and feet bound with linen strips and his face wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Jesus comes to the rescue. But unlike a lot of our rescue stories, this isn't just in the nick of time. This is after it's already too late. And I think that says something to us, that when it comes to Jesus and what he can do for you, the transforming power he can work in your life, it is never too late. I think that when Jesus shows up here and he comes to the rescue, he says a couple things really powerfully. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. He says, what you're looking for is me. What you're looking for is me. And that no matter how far gone you are, if you come to me, if you come and take that source of life, if you come and find meaning in me, if you come and build your life around me, you commit yourself to the gospel, live a life that honors God, there will be life in those dry bones. That Jesus is able to bring life and goodness and hope in any situation. But I think sometimes, as we follow this call, as we hear from our lowly estate, we hear from our place of brokenness, that as Ephesians chapter 2 says, that while we were dead in our sin and we hear God call us, we come out and we follow him. But I feel like some of us this morning, as we're following God out of the tomb of selfishness, of a life lived for ourselves into a life lived for God, I feel like some of us are still wearing our grave clothes. We've been raised into something new, but we're still tied down by the things that trapped us. And so this morning, my challenge to you is to unbind and set free. My challenge to you is to understand that Jesus really is who he said he is. He is the resurrection. He is the life. He is your help in the time of trouble. And he is your help now. Not when you get your life together. He is your help now. Not when you've figured out whatever issues you've got going on. He is the resurrection now. And so maybe you need to make that commitment for the very first time this morning. Maybe you need to say, Jesus, I'm going to die to myself and be raised to newness of life and trust in your meaning and your purpose and your power. If you need to do that this morning, this is the time. Maybe you did that a long time ago, but those grave clothes are weighing you down. Maybe you did that a long time ago, but the struggles of life are pulling you back, and you're saying, Jesus, if you'll only, then the time is now. Even now, God is willing and able. The resurrection and the life is here to the rescue. The Spirit and the bride say, come. Let those who hear say, come. Let the one who wants to come and take of the free gift of the water of life come. If you have any need, now is the time as we stand and as we sing.